welcome back to Politics Relax. Today we're going to be talking about the budget. Rishi Sunak announced all of his new pledges on Wednesday, and I have certainly a lot to say about them. So does anybody want to start, or I'm happy to?
Yeah, you can start.
You should start, and then we'll respond.
Okay. Well, he spoke over 7,000 words in total, and not one of them were climate or the environment, which is slightly worrying considering we're just days away from an international summit on climate change. One of the only things he did announce which have an effect, or he probably had more, but one of the things he announced that had an effect on the climate was he was reducing taxes on flights within the country. So he's obviously showing his green initiative there. I'd also talk an interesting thing, the ONS figures on Brexit. Brexit will do 2 times as much damage long-term to the economy than the pandemic. And export and import intensity has been reduced by Brexit, which is obviously not a particularly big surprise. I'd say another thing that was disappointing, one, the taxes, high taxes. Realistically, everybody wants low taxes, but a lot of those taxes are going to be affecting working people, which I think it's disappointing to see. And actually the main thing that I'd bring up is, again, that £20 universal credit. The government could have supported that £20 universal credit uplift for a year, but instead they chose to use that money to give bankers a tax rate. That's going to cost 4 billion, when instead that 4 billion would have kept the universal credit uplift for millions of working families in this country. One of the hardest times, cost of living is going up, and the fuel prices are going up, food prices are going up. So it's just it could be a really bad time. I mean, a lot of people are going to be affected in a negative way financially by these announcements.
So I really want to get into a lot of specifics today, which might sound boring, but I think it's important. So besides the national insurance rise, what are the other tax rises that you're talking about?
I mean, the national insurance is the main one. They've also...
so it's the only one.
It's not. There's one more, but I don't have it. Where is it? I'll get it for you. Give me a sec.
There is the 50% business rate discount for retail, hospitality, and leisure centres.
Yeah, so these aren't tax rises. For
business rates
people.
Are to be reformed, whatever that means. And national living rates.
Exactly.
Increases.
Okay, so none of that is relevant. So let me just say that if we're talking about this budget, no, you cannot say that this budget is raising taxes on working people.
The national insurance rise is a big tax. It's a big tax on everybody. And it means that one of the things that's going towards is the NHS tax rise. The NHS tax rise is effectively, if you look at the sums on it, is being paid by NHS staff because of the cost to them over the time because of the national insurance rise. So it's quite a hefty increase.
It is. It's a big tax, and we already had this debate weeks ago, which is why I don't think it's too important to the debate on the budget. But I said quite clearly that I didn't think that was the right way of going about it in terms of raising that money. But I think that if we're talking about the budget, it's not right to say that it's going to make people worse off. And even the Resolution Foundation, which is a well-respected think tank whose entire aim is to improve outcomes for people on low and modest incomes, have released research showing that the budget will result in people on average becoming better off. Now, what they said was this government's decision has been worth nearly £500 per year extra to households on average, and more than £1,000 for the poorest households. And that's before factoring in wage growth, including the rise in the national living wage. And I might just add that particular think tank is even headed up by a former Labour member. So I think that you can't argue this is going to make people particularly worse off. And I want to talk next about climate change, because you mentioned it. And you're right that it wasn't a factor that was mentioned in the budget. But the reason for that is because the government have already released their very clear plans to total £40 billion of green investment, and how they want to detail that. They've already announced, and they're already actually doing in our day-to-day lives, and have been for nearly a year, I think, now. So that's why that wasn't a big feature. And I understand that many people will have seen this as quite a low-key budget in many of the things that it announced. But there are a couple of myths relating to two small things in this budget that I really want to tackle, which is firstly about what Labour are describing as a tax break for wealthy champagne sipping bankers. Now, Labour have been purporting this myth, and I think that this kind of rhetoric is frankly an insult to the 1.1 million people employed in the financial services industry. The measure of reducing the tax surcharge on banks themselves, not bankers, which is a ridiculous comment, on banks, is all about advancing the UK's position as a hub for financial services, which it already is, but post-Brexit, of course, we have to maintain and enhance that position. So currently, it's an industry that contributes £132 billion to our economy. But as I say, post-Brexit, we've got to maintain and further that role. And that obviously involves incentivising that industry with measures like this. So I think it's wrong to criticise that. And finally, I want to talk a bit about the flights that you're talking about, the domestic flights. And what I'd say on this is lots of flights domestically, especially in the past year, have been running on very low capacity with very few passengers. Now, this isn't a tax, or this isn't a reduction in tax on flights. It's a reduction in tax of the price of flights for passengers. What that will mean will be that flights have more passengers on than in the past, and it doesn't necessarily lead to more flights on the whole. You've got to accept that. And also, what I'd add on to that is, if you're worried about the impact on climate in that sense, the way to be worried about it is not by deciding that you want to take punitive measures against airlines, especially after the horrible last year and a half that they've had, and that entire industry has been decimated, for which I have immense sympathy. That because the truth is that the technology will develop to a point where we do have green flights, if you like. We will have flights powered by green energy. So airlines are going to be around for a long time. They employ millions of people across the world, and we've got to support them. And this is a method of doing that, as well as also looking after another industry, the hospitality industry, that in this country has also been severely damaged for the last year. And it's quite right that we encourage people, we incentivize them in this way to travel across the UK, to visit holiday resorts in the UK, and to enjoy some vacations across the UK. Whereas, of course, in correlation with that, we're also increasing the rates for flights, for long-haul flights, for example, to Australia or anything. So hopefully that will kind of nullify any climate impact you're worried about, whilst also improving the impact on our hospitality services in this country.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I'll take the bit that you finished on, which is the flights. I mean, first of all, that the tax you talk about on ultra long haul flights is gonna be about £7 to long haul flights. Considering these flights cost hundreds and hundreds of pounds, I don't really see how that's going to have a huge impact on people taking those flights. In terms of
these long haul flights are already greatly taxed. I mean, the real price of these tickets is 150, 180 pounds, but due to the amount of taxes that they have, they of course, depending on the destination, they go from 400 to 700 pounds. And sure, the £7 won't make much of a difference, but you can't really be saying that we need more taxes on those flights in particular.
I don't necessarily think that I mean, I think there has to be a clear plan of how we phase out aviation, or at least aviation that is going to be destructive to the planet. Cameron's wishful thinking is that we're going to have new technology, which means that we can still fly super long haul. And I really hope that's the case, but it could take years for that to happen. So it's
I didn't say super long haul. I didn't say super long haul. I said flights. in general.
Yeah, but again,
I was actually focusing primarily. I was focusing primarily on domestic flights, which is the context in which I was giving to that.
We have the thing I don't really understand is we have technology already called trains that already get us across the country in a greener way than flights. So why not? I mean, I know that some
I will say this: domestic surcharge is quite bizarre because not many people take domestic flights in the UK already, and of course the government has been pushing the whole train initiative, what with HS2 and their nationalization thing that they want to do in the next couple of years. So
don't call it
doing this in addition, I mean, I just think it's a bit strange.
I do want to return back to some of the other things Cameron says. I mean, you talked a bit about how people will be better off. I think that's a bit of cherry picking statistics, because the New Economics Foundation showed the poorest fifth of households will still be £328 worse off, and the IFS also said that millions will not benefit from Sunak's tax cut for low paid. So there's obviously millions of statistics you can take from budgets, but I think that a lot of people are going to be feeling like the pressure in the next 6 months, especially after the fuel shortages, after the increase in cost of living, and after like the food shortages. It's gonna add up, this cost and the loss of universal credit. And I don't want to keep pushing that, but I still think it is very important, because there are loads of people that will be affected by it. Another thing that I want to bring up is, obviously we're young people. I think it's important to talk about the things that the Conservatives introduced for young people. I was quite disappointed with this as well. Obviously the climate change stuff, he mentioned cider more than he did climate change, which is disappointing from my end, but also education. The £2 billion sum that he's put forward to it is completely under what it needs to be. I mean, the education czar, I forgot, but he's talking about billions, in the tens of billions, I think, actually, for what education needs to bounce back. And it was ridiculous, really. Rishi Sunak was so proud of the fact that education was back to 2010 levels. One of the most important things in our society, education, if not the most important. And we're only going back, it hasn't increased in funding in over 10 years. It just doesn't. It doesn't make sense to me. Another thing that he announced was the family hubs, but he says the first 1,000 days of a child's life are the most important. And yet the Conservatives closed over 1,000 family hubs since 2010, and the number that he's announced is nowhere near of what 2010. It just shows that we're way below what we were in 2010. I mean, that's what he kept saying. He was like, look at this, we're doing all this since 2010. We're doing better than that. And it's like, this just shows how much Tory austerity has affected this country.
I mean, the budget is introducing new funding. That's what we're talking about here. It's new funding. Take it. I think
this just shows the state of education in this country and how little this government values education. It's like, oh, take it. £2 billion is absolutely nowhere near what is needed to fix education. I mean, we've been out of school for on and on 18 months.
Define fix education. This is what I have an issue with. I feel like we constantly hear when it comes to education, when it comes to education, throw some money at it. And I really feel as though we need to see some more detailed plans from those who say throw money at it. What is going to happen with that money? The £2 billion that's been announced is to help schools and colleges to recover from the pandemic. That is pretty specific. The £4.7 billion is to go to schools and they can allocate that funding themselves. That's pretty specific. And then there's things like the Start for Life programme, 300 million. That's pretty specific. It's a parenting programme. And there's also the UK-wide numeracy programme. These are specific things that the money is being invested in. And I feel like people often say, oh yeah, let's throw £20 billion at it and see what happens. And that's not, in my opinion, an intelligent way of going about it.
Okay, well, do you know that 1/8 of schools were in the deficit this year, and that's expected to increase hugely in the next year. I went to a talk actually at Labour Party conference on this specific issue, and the fact is education needs so much more funding because so many schools are having to cut things off. They just need more funding, and the education czar set out he set out a report, and I think the government should be taking his advice instead of making him resign because they won't promise the money. He said, I think, I don't know the exact figure, but it was in the tens of billions what he was saying education needs for it to bounce back after the pandemic. What you're forgetting is we have been out of school for 18 months. That is going to have a huge effect on kids. And it's so important that we try and get them to bounce back. And that involves money, and that involves a clear plan. And that has not been set out at all. I mean, if I want to go back to Brexit a little bit, because Rishi Sunak during the Brexit, I mean, you can't complain because now we're seeing food shortages, we're seeing fuel shortages partly due to Brexit. And actually, I just want to read out this quote from Rishi Sunak during the Brexit campaign. He said, quote unquote, outside the customs union, shoppers could buy the cheapest product available, saving us all real money. So why have and said Brexit will do twice as much long-term damage to the economy than the pandemic. Take that. We have had the biggest pandemic in over 180 years, and now we're saying that something that we were promised would give us all real money is going to have more of a damage than a global pandemic to the economy.
So first, if I take on the food shortages, because I'm particularly interested in this because I'm in Portugal at the moment, and I can tell you that the state of supermarkets is significantly worse here than in the UK. For example, one thing that I heard was that there was only one bottle of sun cream in the entire supermarket, and it was priced at €17.50. And that, I think, gives you hopefully a glance that this is not a UK specific issue. And we've already debated this in previous videos, but I now have that personal experience. But I want to talk a bit about the state of the economy, because you talk about kind of a pessimistic outlook on growth, that's not. I think that's what you're saying.
No, that's not. All I'm saying is that Brexit's having a huge effect. I'm reading you out IFS statistics. I haven't even given you my personal opinion. I've read out an IFS statistic. Sorry?
What is the statistic?
Not a statistic. I meant to say a prediction. Brexit will do twice as much long-term damage.
It's a prediction. It's not true.
Yeah. No, but
the IFS, and it's by a left-leaning is what the whole budget think tank.
To be clear, the IFS is what the whole budget has been set on is on these IFS predictions. So it's not right just to say, oh, they're IFS prediction. They are pretty important predictions.
No.
Rishi Sunak has based a lot of the budget off the IFS.
No, it's been based off the OBR, not the IFS.
I'm sorry.
And talking about the office budget. Yeah.
Oh no, I think it was from the OBR maybe. It's from the OBR, not the IFS. I think.
So what's from the OBR?
The quote about Brexit. I'll just check that, but I think it was from the OBR.
No, it won't be from the OBR because they're a neutral organisation.
I suppose the IFS who are really
connected to the government. Well, they're not really left wing. They're a think tank, so they're allowed to have opinions.
Yeah.
So I think that on the state.
Yeah, it was the OBR. The OBR. Yeah. It was the OBR, not the IFS, who said that Brexit will do 2 times as much long-term damage to the economy. It wasn't the IFS. It was the OBR.
I'm not allowed to say that.
Okay. Well, what the OBR have also said though is that their predictions for our economic growth over the last year and into the future have been massively understated. And what we're actually doing is our economy is bouncing back much faster than how it had been initially anticipated. So I think that there should be a more optimistic outlook on this that will hopefully encourage consumers to get more involved in the economic workings at the moment.
The one thing I'd say is that there are millions of people in poverty who've just had their universal credit cut who won't be seeing the same optimistic outlook that you present. I mean, it's all great for the middle class of this country to say, great, it's so optimistic because the economy's bounced. And look, the economy is bouncing back. That's good, but cost of living is going up as well. So it's important to recognise that it's more balanced than what Rishi Sunak and you would like to say. it's great if it's optimistic, but there are also a lot of caveats to that.
Piers, do you want to say anything?
Not particularly. If I said anything, it would just be mentioning more statistics, and I think we've had enough of those.
We have.
Wages have grown by 3.4%, people.
Yeah, exactly. This is the point, actually. It's a good point by Piers. Wages are up. We know that. Jobs
Inflation
are
is up.
Okay.
Taxes are up.
Hey, at least it's not Biden level inflation.
Exactly. Inflation, actually, I don't think that we should be too pessimistic about inflation. And I know that many people actually are pessimistic, but if people are pessimistic about inflation, that's what might well lead to inflation, because that's the way that these economic cycles work. So we shouldn't
should just pretend that it's not happening.
I'm not going to pretend that there's no inflation. There is clearly inflation, and we know that we need to get the levels down back to the typical kind of 2% that you want to be at. But nevertheless, it's not that much higher at the moment. The reason why it might get higher is if people start deciding to do ridiculous things like panic buy, which is why we need to be much more optimistic, I think, and be encouraging people to buy sensibly around the place. But what I would say, and this is important when it comes to the state of the economy, is that now we have been through such an exogenous shock, we're likely to see strains on supply that we have seen. We're likely to see big rises in demand, and of course that will have an impact on the economy. But for me, it's an optimistic outlook that what we're seeing is, besides all that, in spite of it, we are seeing wages growing in real terms, unlike some people have been arguing.
Are you sure about that? Because
we are.
Average weekly wages, which take into account GDP, in April they were at £491, and in July they were at 488. So I think it's a bit.
So in comparison to February 2020, wages are going up in spite of the pandemic. That's what I'm referring. You can look at it. You can look at it on a micro basis if you want, but I'm not sure that's particularly helpful. They have grown. They've grown in real terms, as Piers mentioned, by 3.4% since February 2020, in spite of the pandemic. Unemployment is down. It's lower than was previously predicted, and we're seeing that the annual growth is expected to rise much faster than was initially predicted. So the state of the economy is positive, and people should be optimistic about that, and they should be optimistic about their chances of getting jobs if they're suffering at the moment. And of course, people on low-paid jobs are going to be helped by measures such as the rise in the national living wage that will improve their economic circumstances. So for me, I think that people on low-paid jobs and who may be struggling at the moment should be, and I know it's easy for me to say this, but I think they should be, based off this set of measures, fairly encouraged.
Cameron, I've got a question for you, actually. Not a bad question, just a question. Do you think this was a lot of people have been calling this budget and Piers, actually, either of you. A lot of people have been comparing this budget to Gordon Brown, which I would not agree with. But do you think it's more a Brown budget or more a what's his name? Can't think of bloody gone out of my mind. What's his name?
It's not exactly the most traditional conservative budget, is it? I think it does parallel somewhat with some degree of the Labour Party over the last 20 years. That's as specific as I'm going to go. But I think that combines with the government being somewhat more paternalistic than previous iterations of the Conservative Party, and Keir Starmer going for this strange low tax approach.
It's not low. Just to repeat what the party line is, it's not low tax. It is different tax. We would like to tax the people who earn the most money, who are earning their money off stocks and shares, and who are like people who are earning the most money should be taxed the most. That's the line. That's all I just say.
Well, it's not an exact role reversal, but it's a shift on both accounts, I'd say.
So It's interesting you asked me this, and I'm sure you're probably quite surprised that I haven't brought up fiscal responsibility yet in this entire episode. And that was
I was waiting for it. I have a little statistic if you were ready to bring it up.
Well, look, I haven't mentioned fiscal responsibility because I don't believe that the amount of spending on this is too severe. I do think that 150 billion for all government departments is a lot. But it is over the course of the parliament, and that's what's, I think, letting me be okay about it. I would be concerned. I think that, as I say, the levels of spending are positive overall. We're making small but necessary steps coming out of the pandemic. I think that I trust the Chancellor and the Treasury to be thinking also about cutting the deficit, and that's something that we're going to have to do, because really what conservatism also entails is making sure that we don't leave a massive debt for our generation in the future, that we're not left to pay the bill, and that for me is really important. So long as all of this spending is being it's being paid for by money being brought in by the government, then I'm all right with that. And it seems to me as though most of the spending is, because we do need to cut borrowing, and with £3 trillion of debt. So of course, obviously, you want that to happen.
I kind of finished with these two thoughts. One of them, it was much more a Boris Johnson budget than a Rishi Sunak budget, because Sunak throughout has been, I'm a Thatcherite conservative and I want to save money, I want low taxes, and I want no deficit. And Boris Johnson is much more, let's spend some money, let's show the North, and look at all this money that we're bringing in. And it was very much a budget of, look at all this money that we're bringing in, rather than let's be fiscally conservative, let's be safe. And actually, another thing that brings me on to my second point, which is this felt a bit like an election budget, or near to an election budget. There were lots of announcements, there were lots of spending, and it was like, you get money, you get money, you get leveling up, you get leveling up. And that could, and I actually, another thing I saw was Strictly Come Dancing contestant Ed Balls on Peston said that what election is it? Is it the Conservative Party leadership election, or is this a general election? So I think I'd make a small prediction, which is 2023. I think we might be seeing an election, but obviously that's going to depend on a lot of different factors. But it did look like an election budget.
Well, that'll be
just say, and you
can't vote until 2024.
Yeah, I can vote, but you can pull this out. You can pull this out the trap in 2 years. I will tell you already that I think a 2023 general election would be an imbecilic idea, and I think that we'd be harmed by it as a party.
Yeah, I mean, and here's the thing. I mean, this is there are caveats to my prediction of a 2023 election, which are polling, which is possible crises that might come up. There's obviously a lot of things to come, but it did feel like lots of spending, lots of leveling up, which I'm still slightly confused on the meaning of it. But I mean, the real question is, does Rishi Sunak know geography?
Yeah, you had a field day with that, didn't you?
I did. Burnley and Bury, and the other one, he tweeted Rachel Reeves with one of his very snarky tweets, which he was sending out to all the Labour shadow cabinet, and it was about how all this levelling up fund is going into her constituency, when in reality it was a Conservative constituency next door. And another thing,
that's what she said.
The two Bury, that is what. Also.
Well, to be fair, Burnley and Bury are quite close to each other.
But here's an interesting fact. There are two Bury seats. The Conservative won by just over 100 votes, and they won another by just over 400 votes. So will 600 people be swayed by Rishi Sunak getting confused between the two towns? That'll be interesting to watch.
Well, what I would say is that I watched his interview on Sky that morning, which was before he did the BBC one, I think. and he got the Berry bit right. He remembered which term he was in that one. So perhaps he was just getting a bit tired. The BBC
Tired of
interview.
he was getting tired of saying Berry, and so he thought he'd tweet it off of it. Anyway, I think that's kind of it. Thank you everybody for coming. Thanks for watching. Like the video, subscribe. Cheers.